Hey, Kinfolk, what's up? Welcome to Sgt Dorsey Speaks, live at 5 on Thursday. And I have got an action-packed rock'em sock'em show for you. So come on in, let me, as you and I settle down together, just make sure that this is broadcasting on my other social media platforms. And then once I do that, we'll just get right to it. I know, and I settle down. Let me turn this volume down. I know that probably many of you are here to hear what I have to say about Brother Cube. So I'm not going to belabor that point. I'm going to start off with that. But I also want to update you on several police incidents. There are several either police fatal shootings or law enforcement in custody deaths that I want to talk to you about. And so I want to update you on what's going on because we're in this political climate. We're less than 19 days away from election day, right? But I'm hearing from the pundits that every day is election day right now because folks are voting and they are voting in record numbers. Now, I don't know what that means, but I don't want you guys to be complacent, those of you who are inclined to vote, because I know some of my kinfolk, not really about that life, right? Y'all don't want to waste your vote, but a no vote is a waste, just so you know. But nonetheless, people are voting in record numbers, and I don't know who's voting. I don't know if it's Democrats or Republicans or independents. I don't know, but folks are voting in record numbers. And so know this because it's being talked about so that nobody loses their collective shit on the day of the election, November 3rd. It'll probably be election week, maybe even election month before the races are called in all 50 states. Some states are not even going to start counting ballots until election day, November 3rd, official election day. And so we may not know in some of those critical states whether or not, it's a done deal. So don't be swayed, don't be discouraged if you don't hear what you need to hear on November 3rd, because we may not hear until, December 3rd. I don't know. This is a crazy season and we just need to be prepared for everything. So having said that, welcome. Now, let me start right away. Let me say hello to a few folks. Hey, Karen. Hey, Daryl. DB, what's up? Welcome, DB. We were just together last night virtually, and so I'm happy to see you back here tuning in to see what I have to say. Hey, Loretta, what's up? I want to talk to you about the Jonathan Price fatal police shooting in Texas, Wolf City, Texas. I understand that Brother Price was buried on last weekend. I also want to update you on the Ronell Foster, Willie McCoy fatal police shooting up in Vallejo, California. There are a couple of other Dennis Plowden in Louisiana. There is so much. It's hard. It is really hard to keep track. I do my best, and thank you guys for helping me stay abreast of all of these incidents because I can't, as just, me by myself, keep up with all of this. So those of you who send me little private messages, DMs, IMs, emails, I appreciate all of that. I want to update you on what's going on with the Daniel Prude case, brother who was killed in Rochester, New York. So there's a lot of stuff I want to update you on because now that we're in this crazy time, and it's going to be crazy right up until inauguration, I believe, 2021. And so I think that there's going to be some stuff that's just not going to get talked about anymore. You know how it is. You guys have already changed channels. They know, they watching you. They know that you're not paying attention. And so what was important to us a week ago, 2 weeks ago, they think is not important to us right now. So they're not talking about it. I'll talk about it if things are posted that I can get to and share with you, because I think it's important for these family members. You guys can change channels. They don't get to do that. So some of the things that I'm going to be sharing with you. Hey, Daryl, so you're calling from Pine Pine Tops, North Carolina. Hey, Loretta, you calling from Texas. Good looking out. I appreciate you guys joining me. Um, these families don't get to change channels. This is something that they deal with forevermore, right? And so when you hear me say some stuff, if you got a pen and pad with you as we're together, and you can write down someone who you might want to reach out to on behalf of the family and just say, hey, what's up? What are you guys doing? Because listen, a lot of this stuff just gets shoved under the rug. You know how they do, unless it becomes a social media situation or something goes viral. If it doesn't go viral, then if they cannot report on it, they won't. And I'll tell you some instances where just that very thing happened, and just show you exactly how high up the very top. I always say the fish rots from the head. Police chiefs, police commissioners, they're some of the main culprits in some of these fatal police encounters, who are doing their level best to keep the community from finding out. And while now some places have body cam, they don't want to release it. And there's some emails that went back and forth over in Rochester about the murder of Daniel Prude, and how a brother man, because all Skinfolk ain't Kinfolk, Chief LaRon Singletary was doing his level best for weeks to keep what happened to Daniel Prude a secret. And that's why Sister Girl, the mayor over there, showed him the door, is because he was trying to hide information relative to what actually killed, how Mr. Prude actually died, because it wasn't just a drug overdose like they wanted us to believe. But we'll talk about that a little later. So let me just get right to this whole Ice Cube thing. And then if I can remind me, and if I don't, you remind me, I want to talk to you about the documentary 16 Shots that dealt with the fatal police shooting of Laquan McDonald in Chicago, and all the brouhaha and everything that was found out after the fact, because over there, they too were hiding the ball. But let me just talk a little bit about this whole Ice Cube situation. And so, now he's doing damage control for real. And he is saying, in all caps on Twitter with some expletives, that he would never support Lil Tink. Well, I think he got played. I think he should have known better. He should have known that Lil Tink would use him as a prop. And it's been reported today on the Readout with Joy Reid, by one of the talking heads on her show, that actually Biden's campaign had the same information given to them that Lil Tink's campaign received with regards to the CBA, Contract for Black America, this program that Ice Cube has put forth. And so he thought it might make sense, I don't know why, 19 days out from an election, to give this to Lil Tink, have a conversation with him. And you see, when Lil Tink's people talked about it, they didn't mention nothing about that CBA. They said, oh, thank you for agreeing to work with us on the platinum plan, whatever the hell that is. For all I know, the platinum plan could have something to do with a whole bunch of ships that they're planning on putting you and me and folks who look like us back on, right? So Ice Cube made a decision. He made a judgment call, and he had a conversation with them. And the first thing that Lil Tink did was got in front of a bank of cameras and said, hey, Cube, Mr. Cube, thank you for agreeing to work with us. Now, I don't know if that's what he agreed to do, but he got because he met with him. He gave him some information. And just like I know, that this guy, Lil Tink, is a narcissistic, pathological liar, card-carrying Klansman, allegedly, certainly supporter of KKK, the good people, Yeah, so giving him anything is really moot, because it's not like he's going to do anything with what you gave him, Mr. Cube. He's had 3.5 years to deal with us if he had an appetite to do that, Mr. Cube. And so you went over there and you had a fireside chat with him, and you gave him some documentation. And then he got on TV and said, hey, Cube, thanks, as if to infer that somehow that wasn't a tacit endorsement of him. And so you should have known better, Mr. Cube. I don't know how you got caught lunching like that. But nonetheless, now we know he's in damage control. And so I had an opportunity to talk with some of you in the shop last night about at least a portion of the CBA contract, the areas that dealt with police reform, because I try to stay in my lane. So when I looked at the things that he was purporting to request, because all he's doing is asking, ain't nobody got to, you know, abide by any of this stuff that's in his CBA. But the things that Cube talked about in regards to police reform, a lot of it was stuff that we already do. A lot of it was stuff that police departments are not going to do. And some of it was stuff that just, you know, it's not going to stop the things that what I'm hearing from people who've lost loved ones and family members who have folks who've been hurt by the police is, you know, officer accountability. I don't know why these politicians on both sides of the aisle will talk about doing everything but holding an officer accountable, because I can tell you what I know as a patrol officer and as a patrol supervisor for 20 years, that the things that they're proposing, it's not going to change how I think. It's not going to change what I do when I put on that uniform and get in a patrol car. I don't give a damn if you reallocate resources. I don't give a damn if you prevent officers from working overtime. I don't care if you send out a crisis intervention team like LAPD is about to do. And we had that back in the day. We had pet officers. No, MEU. Well, PET and MEU, Medical Evaluation Unit, is where the PET officers worked. And when you had someone who was having a mental episode, you could call them to come out and have a dialogue. But the problem with that is if I'm out in patrol and I see a car do a California stop and I want to issue you a citation and I stop you for not stopping four-wheel lock stop at a stop sign and you're bipolar, I'm not calling a medical crisis intervention team. I'm going to deal with you right then and there. And so while some of you, some of the activists may think that that's a good thing, and police chiefs who are very savvy, and I'll explain some of that to you in a little bit, they already know that none of that is going to change what an officer does. And they already know that when an officer kills you, that they're going to minimize and mitigate it. They're going to circle the wagons. They're going to explain it away, whether it's on video cam or not. So they'll agree to it, maybe. So I don't know who Mr. Cube talked to when he was putting together the portion that deals with police reform. Cube, I'm here if you want to reach out. I'll help you with the things that you have to be on the department to know to ask for. Hit me up. I'll help you. So as I'm reading all of this stuff, I'm understanding, because I know the lingo and I know double talk, company speak when I hear it from police chiefs and others. So I was just like, dude, you blew it by meeting with Tink and even discussing this with him, because first of all, he doesn't have the authority to do it. I'm going to talk about how much power police chiefs have and how little folks can rein them in. I mentioned in my podcast, which dropped today, should have dropped yesterday, but I was a little busy. And so I was late getting it to my producer, but I talked about a bill that Governor Newsom just signed here in California that will give our Independent Civilian Review Board, the police commission, subpoena powers. So that's cool. I mean, I don't say no to anything. Subpoena powers are good. It gives the police commission the opportunity to get stuff if folks respond to the subpoena. I can tell you this, that having subpoena power don't necessarily mean that the person you subpoena, you serve a subpoena on for records is going to respond. When I worked at LAUSD in the Office of the Inspector General, we had subpoena power. I would issue subpoenas to banks for records because someone was accused of theft, and then the banks would just laugh at me. They're like, I'm not giving you that. I don't have time. I'm over here doing the Lord's work. And guess what? There was nothing I could do because I was a civilian, much like our civilian review board. And so, again, I don't say no to anything, but I just want you guys to know that civilian review boards don't really have any teeth. And even if they get a subpoena and they get all these records and they tell a police chief, like ours did a couple of years ago in the fatal shooting of Ezel Ford, Charlie Beck, that they had a problem with the use of deadly force, Charlie Beck said, okay, thank you. And then he went up to the top of the administration building and made an audio recording for his officers saying, hey, I got you. I got you. I know that the police commission had a problem with that shooting, but I got you. And so that's the kind of power that police chiefs have. I'm not sure if I'll be able to get to all of your questions because it's kind of scrolling quickly and I don't want to have a senior moment and lose my train of thought. But if you ask me something and I didn't and I don't respond, just put it in the comments again and I'll try to get back. Okay, Perry, you said he's continuing the conversation with both parties and the Black community will, the Black community will no longer be taken for granted. Okay. I respect Ice Cube more than I respect the Democrats. Okay, good for you, sir, ma'am, whoever you are. I think in this case, we should encourage and advise him and make that plan better. I'm with you. I'm all about making it better. And that's why I said, Cube, reach out. I'll tell you the words to say, the questions to ask so that you get those things that are important in your CBA. Glenn, you said it's not, he didn't get played. It sounds ridiculous. I think I got on the wrong shirt tonight. I need to have your agreement is not required. Yeah, I think I got the wrong shirt on. Okay. So anyway, that's what I have to say about the whole Ice Cube thing, because, you know, I don't say no to anything, but to meet with tink for me, and your agreement is not required. Be clear, understand, your agreement is not required. Because Tink is a pathological liar and a sociopath, and he's not going to keep his word. He has not with anyone, and he certainly is not going to keep his word to Ice Cube about anything that's going to benefit us. His record speaks volumes as to what he's done in the past, what he hasn't done in the past, and what you can probably expect if he's given another 4-year term. We haven't seen anything come out of that Justice Department in terms of a civil rights investigation for anyone who's been killed by an errant police officer during his tenure. As a matter of fact, Bill Barr waited until the 11th hour on the 5-year anniversary of Eric Garner having been choked to death to come out and say at 12 o'clock noon that, yeah, guess what? I'm not going to investigate Daniel Pantaleo. So there's that. And I mean, there's a litany of other names of folks who have lost their life since Eric Garner in July of 2014, and not a one has been investigated under the administration of Little Tink and Bill Barr. And so that's not going to change. But listen, keep hope alive. Your agreement is not required. So that's what I have to say about that. Now, let me talk to you. Let me move on and talk to you about Daniel Prude's death. That's the Black man mentally ill in Rochester, New York. And what happened is that now, recently, a lot of email transmissions have been released between the police chief, LaRon Singletary, and his deputy, I think one of his lieutenants, very high up officials within the Rochester Police Department, because Daniel Prude was killed when they put a spit hood over his head. And then one of the officers put pressure on his upper torso and wound up suffocating him. Well, what LaRon Singletary, a Black man, the police chief, said is that it was just a simple overdose, no big deal, nothing to see here. Now we know that there were emails going back, and it's reported that there were dozens of emails, police reports, and internal reviews that revealed an array of delay tactics by the police chief, delay tactics in reporting what really happened, from citing hospital privacy laws to blaming an overworked employee's backlog in processing videos as to why they were not releasing the video relative to the whole spit hood suffocation death of Daniel Prude. Now, LaRon Singletary saw that video. He knew exactly what had happened in that incident, and they were trying to keep it from coming forward. The family was doing all kinds of paperwork submission, FOIA, asking for information, and they were like, stall, stall, stall. You know what they do when they don't want to give up information. They'll say that the investigation is ongoing. We don't want to interfere with a possible criminal arrest that could occur, whether that's even a real thing. That's what police chiefs say to prevent you, the public, from seeing what happened. And so they were successful up until a point, and then they had to go ahead and give it up and release the information regarding Daniel Prude. Says the documents that are now being released show how the police attempted to frame a narrative in the very early hours of Mr. Prude's potential for danger. So they were dirtying him up like they do and glossing over the tactics that the officers used when they pinned him down naked and then put that spit hood on him before he stopped breathing. In one of the police reports, in the confrontation box, one of the police reports regarding the confrontation had a box where you indicate who this person is, right? And at first, Mr. Prude was listed as a victim, but then one of the officers or either some higher up said, oh, no, don't designate Daniel Prude as a victim. They said, refer to him as an individual, as if somehow there's a difference between victim and individual. The inference being, if he's a victim, that means somebody did something to him, and that wasn't what they wanted people to understand about Daniel Prude. Then they said, no, make him a suspect. Someone wrote somewhere in this documentation, no, make Daniel Prude a suspect because he's got to be guilty of something when they put hands on you and ultimately cause your death. The officer that was involved in Mr. Prude's inability probably to take in air, his name is Officer Vaughn. And what happened with Officer Vaughn is that he was leaning, the way it's written, very heavily on Mr. Prude's head as they had him pinned down onto the ground. And it says that this Officer Vaughn was in a push-up position. Oh, no, he had Mr. Prude's head in a push-up position, and he held that position for about 68 seconds. Now, when they wrote up the report, the way they described it is they said Chief Singletary, the police chief, wrote in his report that actually Officer Vaughn was trying to, quote, stabilize Mr. Prude by holding him on the ground, stabilizing him. Code talk, double speak, company speak for. He had him pinned down on the ground with his body weight on top of him after they had put a hood on his head, and Mr. Prude could not breathe. Very different from when a police chief says, oh no, my officers they were just trying to stabilize him, just keep him still on the ground. It wasn't what you think. That's what Chief Singletary wrote. And that is what police chiefs do. Circle the wagons. They knew this was going to be a big incident. Remember, this was right on the heels of the George Floyd murder by Derek Chauvin and his cohorts. And so they were concerned about any particular blowback from the community if they saw yet another video of another white man pressing his body weight on top of a black man to the extent that this person ultimately died. The other high-ranking official who was involved in this whole delay / cover-up is named Mark Simmons, and his rank is deputy chief on the Rochester Police Department. And then there was a police lieutenant by the name of Michael Perkowski, who also had been sending emails back and forth to the city lawyer, a female by the name of Stephanie Prince. So listen, these are people with a lot of clout, if you will. City attorney, police lieutenant, deputy chief, police chief, all trying to figure out as best they can how to keep the Prude family from getting that video showing what actually happened to their loved one. And so now we know, because it's out, it's been released, and we know that the mayor, when she found out, she was not happy, and she sent Mr. Singletary to the cornfields. He lost his job. Simmons was ultimately, I believe, demoted to lieutenant, but then when Singletary was fired, they needed a chief, and so somebody promoted Simmons to interim. So he was a deputy chief, then he was a lieutenant, and now he's back as the interim police chief until they find a replacement for LaRon Singletary. So that's the brouhaha over in Rochester Police Department. Now, let me tell you what's going on the Chicago Police Department. And Chicago Police Department had a meeting with several community members because they're under a consent decree to do something different and better, right? Lots of stuff going on over there. And this community made a lot of recommendations, 155 different recommendations about when officers should use their taser, when they should use force on protesters. And the police chief on Chicago, for those of you who don't know, is more Skinfolk, David Brown, former Houston police chief David Brown, who sent a robot into a building where a Black man was holed up, allegedly after he shot several Houston police officers. And David Brown sent in a robot carrying a bomb and blew the young man up. Okay, so David is over in Chicago. And him and the mayor, Lori Lightfoot, pretended like they were really interested in doing something different because that's what they do. There were 155 proposed changes to how police conduct themselves on the Chicago Police Department. And of those 155, only 5 of the proposed changes were actually accepted. Now, this community had been meeting and working with high ups on the Chicago Police Department. They were meeting together, it says, weekly for months to help update the department's rules on how and when an officer can shoot their gun, use tasers or batons, and deal with protesters. During these weekly meetings, it would last for about 3 hours, and this started back in June. And so now they've just come out with this recommendation, and the community members are pissed because they spent a lot of time in good faith meeting with these people, thinking that they really did want to do something different, hold their officers accountable, that word that you'll never hear them utter, right? And now these members have found out that, you know what, not so much. They really don't seem to want to hold the officers accountable. This was an effort by the department to so-called increase community participation in policymaking. So note to self, if any of you have an opportunity to be a part of a focus group or some sort of body where you do sit down with police administrators to talk about quality of life issues, holding officers accountable, police reform, whatever it is that they want to dub it, be sure to ask, lots of follow-up questions. Listen to what they say with a very careful ear. Listen for company speak and code talk. And I'm going to tell you some of it that went on with the Chicago Police Department. So if you hear it being uttered by your police administrator, you'll know it and you'll call them on it. So again, this was to increase community participation in policymaking, and this was required by a court-enforced police reform plan, aka consent decree. Now the members who participated are calling it a sham, and here's why. There were several of Chicago Police Department's executive steering committee members who were meeting with these people, and this was the very senior leadership over at the police department. And of these members, there was 34 civilians that were on this group, part of this community group, 34 members, and they included activists, civil rights leaders, and politicians. Not one law enforcement officer retired, because obviously, they've already got high-ranking sworn officers who are participating. It would have been nice if they would have had a retired law enforcement officer. I know there's some over there on the East Coast, because I know a couple of them, not necessarily on Chicago PD, but certainly some that they could have reached out to if they were really being honest about the change that they were pretending to want. But they didn't have any law enforcement. They had all these civilians, and now you've got these high-ranking officials who are used to speaking in a way that sounds good, sounds sexy, means nothing. And you've got civilians who are listening, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Sounds like he wants to do the right thing, only to find out at the end of the process, they were blowing smoke up their nether regions, right? The changes that were actually made, the 5 changes that were actually made, according to some of the members of this group, they're saying it was technical in nature. And it basically, the changes that they agreed to make dealt with language, the language that's used in policy. For instance, in adding a definition for the sanctity of life, when they talk about, sanctity of life and what that means, there was a term that was already included in the existing force policy, but they didn't define what sanctity of life meant. And so I would imagine the community members, they let them have some say about, you tell me what does sanctity of life mean? And then they wrote it down as if it was, given great import and had some real substance to what it was they were trying to prevent from happening in the future. The group members now know that that was BS. They also agreed to change the word when they write reports from subject to person when there's a use of force. So they are no longer going to refer to the person who was beaten up as a subject. They're going to refer to them as a person. And so listen to the company speak from Deputy Chief Ernest Cato. Ernest Cato says this: changes to the language were important, and changes to the language in the use of force policy will send a clear message to officers. Send a clear message about what? To do what? To not do what? Because I'm describing that I just hit this person in the head with my flashlight 7 times, but I call them a person and not a subject, and somehow that makes it more palatable. It's hard to really share this with you and keep a straight face, but I get what they were doing because, again, these are savvy administrators dealing with a community who is unknowing and unsuspecting and believing and trusting these administrators at their word, because great deference is given to a police officer, extreme deference is given to a police chief, a deputy chief, and so on and so forth. The other thing that this deputy chief, Ernest Cato, says that if you're taking the word subject out and you're making it a person, we're now humanizing that individual who we're encountering. So I think that's huge, according to the deputy chief. They're humanizing the person that they just assaulted. Cato was the co-chair of this working group, and he said further, now when every police officer has to write a report, they're going to say that person, not that subject. And somehow that's going to make a difference because they're going to be referring to a person who is a human being. And somehow that's going to make a difference when officers use deadly force. I promise you, as a patrol officer, whether I call them a person, a subject, a thing, it's not going to change my mindset. It's not going to change the reason why I put hands on that person in the first place. And it's certainly not going to deter me from doing it again when I encounter somebody else who pisses me off and now I want to punish them because they piss me off. Call them what you want. I don't see how this is helpful. And now I think, having read this proposal in its entirety, again, some of the 34, 36 members from the community are calling it a sham. I'm saying that they were being very disingenuous. Police Chief, Black man, David Brown, under the supervision of his mayor, because police serve at the pleasure of a mayor, and so she put this panel together. She, Lori Lightfoot, she put this panel together. She picked these 34 people, and it says that there was a, big dog and pony show when they named all the members of the group. And I'm sure they were all very proud to be a part of it and thought that they were going to be really making some headway in terms of the way Chicago PD treats the community. And so that means Lori Lightfoot is complicit. That means she's a partner in that crime. Anyway, there's a University of Chicago law professor named Greg Futterman, and he is the one who's speaking out mostly with regards to this group because he was a member of it. And he says that the department also, in addition to the other 100+ recommendations that they made, the police department rejected recommendations that the city ban chokeholds. They rejected the recommendation that there be a limit as to when tasers can be used and require that all force be used only as a tactic of last resort. Well, the police chief, Lori Lightfoot, they weren't hearing any of that. So they're refusing to ban chokeholds on the Chicago Police Department. And I don't know what the big deal is, because to tell you the truth, again, as a patrol officer, if I'm really in fear for my life and I have the choice, because the chokehold is right up there with deadly force, if I have a choice of choking you or shooting you, I'm not going to choke you. And most police officers wouldn't. Nobody's going to tie up with you to choke you out when the department says, hey, you could just shoot them, you know. I mean, you can choke them, but you can also shoot them. And so, yeah, again, if you're not listening and you're not understanding what it is they're telling you, it's very easy to think that they're doing you a solid, and really they're not. So I think this was all set up the way that it was set up on purpose. And this is just yet another police department with a Black man who's at the helm, who serves at the pleasure of a Black woman, who is pretending to want reform, accountability, and transparency on their police department, but is really doing very little to make that happen. One of the other things that was also rejected from the community was that they wanted to prohibit the use of force against peaceful protesters. Police department administrators said, nope, not interested in that one either. Not interested in that one either. And what they were talking about with use of force is against peaceful protesters is spray, pepper spray, long range acoustic devices, and batons. They were wanting those to not be used against passively resisting protesters, or use any of that to disperse crowds of protesters. And the police department said, no, we'll be tasing folks. We'll be using the long range acoustic devices, and we'll be using our batons. So there's that. Not wanting to hold officers accountable. There's a gentleman by the name of Luis Agostini, and he is a spokesperson for the Chicago Police Department, and he explains away their refusal to prevent officers from using batons and spray and the like against peaceful protesters this way. He says this change was rejected because it's already covered in other existing policy, and the department policy says that, quote, force used in response to a person's lawful exercise of First Amendment right as protected speech, lawful demonstrations, and observing or filming police activity or criticizing a department member is prohibited. So he's saying that there's already policy that says officers can't mess with you when you're doing that. However, if a demonstration is peaceful and a lawful expression of First Amendment rights, then there will be no use of force, because use of force is prohibited. But what he wants you to know is that if there is a peaceful protest and it's not lawful in the eyes of the department, then they'll be using their batons, their spray, and their long range acoustic devices. If it's peaceful, but it's unlawful. For instance, let's say there's a group of folks and they come out and they do a disperse order, and they say that now, you got to go. And if you don't go and you remain, it's an unlawful assembly. So now you see you're very peaceful, but they've deemed this gathering an unlawful assembly. So you get the pepper spray and the long range acoustic device used against you. And they're not willing to change any of that stuff. So it's very important to understand the lingo, and that's why it's so important. And that's why I think they won't do it, is to have someone who's retired, who speaks the lingo, who understands company speak when they hear it, to ask those kinds of questions and to follow up in a way that might be helpful to the community, because they don't know. They don't know police code talk when they hear it. And so a lot of what I do, week to week, when I come to you here on my YouTube channel, as well as Facebook, as well as Instagram, as well as my podcast, Sgt Dorsey Speaks, is to help you better understand the way police talk, the way administrators talk, so that you'll know when they're trying to pull a quick one on you. Okay. Um, Let me slide over to Philadelphia real quick. There's a former police officer over there by the name of Eric Rush. He's 33 years old. And back in 2017, he was fired after he was involved in a shooting of a black man. Now, what happened is that this black man, 25-year-old Dennis Plowden, had been involved in a car chase. I don't know why he didn't stop when this officer Rush tried to pull him over, but he didn't stop. There was a car chase, and ultimately there was a car crash. It was reported that Dennis Plowden died as a result of the car crash. So you have the police department, again, crafting a narrative, the version that they want told, because I say all the time, when an officer kills you, it's only one version to tell, theirs. And because great deference is given to their version, the police department's version, not a whole lot happens. And so for the longest, Eric Rush, 33 years old, on the Philadelphia Police Department had crafted a story. And what he said is that Plowden had died as a result of this traffic collision. Well, we now know that that's not true. The district attorney over there, Larry Krasner, I believe is his name, has had an opportunity to look at some evidence and realizes that it doesn't sync up with the version that Eric Rush had given. And we now know that when Rush responded to the scene of the traffic collision, they said that within 6 to 8 seconds of him exiting his vehicle, he fired his gun. None of the other officers that were present during this police chase felt a need, no immediate defense of their life or Rush's life. They didn't fire, but Rush did. And as a result of that, Plowden was ultimately killed. Now, when Dennis got out of the car after this accident, they said he was a little dazed, as you might imagine. If you hit a pole or a tree and your car is all jacked up, you're shaken up. And so when he got out of the car, he was a little disoriented and may or may not have been following what the officers was telling him perfectly, but he was doing his best. And at some point, he went and sat down on the sidewalk, according to the article, and put his hands up over his head. And when he put his hands up over his head is when Rosh fired shots at him, and one of the rounds went through his finger and then ultimately through his, I guess, face or head or something. And that's how they were able to determine, after a lengthy investigation, that this officer lied and that actually Mr. Plowden was doing his best to comply. Rush was fired in 2018. This incident happened in 2017. He was fired in 2018, and now he has just been charged in the murder of Dennis Plowden, and there is a trial set for next year, April 2021. In the case of Jonathan Price, the black man over in Wolf City, Texas, who was buried last weekend after an encounter with a 6-month on-the-job police officer, Sean Lucas. Well, Jonathan had been assisting in a domestic dispute. I think it was a guy assaulting a woman, and he was intervening, and everything was pretty much said and done by the time 6-month officer Sean Lucas shows up. And then Sean Lucas decides that he thinks a couple of different stories going around, because again, Jonathan is dead, and so he's crafting a story, and he'll stick to it once he finds out which story he wants to tell. But he's got a couple of different versions. One is that he thought Jonathan was drunk, intoxicated, and so he wanted to have a conversation with Jonathan about that. Another version is that Jonathan, according to the officer believed that Jonathan was reaching for his taser. Now, I don't know why he would believe that, but that's what he says. And if that's what he believed, it's very difficult for anyone else to argue what's in his head. So he says that Jonathan may have been intoxicated. He thinks he was reaching for his taser, and that's why he wound up shooting him. So what we now know, because this was an easy fix, Sean Lucas was a probationary officer, 6 months on the job, wasn't tenured, did not have the same protections as a officer who's been with the department longer, obviously. And I think this is a small department too. I think I want to get my stories mixed up, but I think this may be, I'll come back and tell you. I think it's only like 6 officers on the whole doggone department. So, when you think police department, you think, like, well, everybody's not LAPD in New York, but, you don't think 6 officers, right? But anyway, now we know that, this Sean Lucas, he was just a jackass. That there were many residents in the short 6 months that he had been on the police department in Wolf City who were complaining, who is this guy? Where did they find him? Black and white. In the short time that he had been a police officer, there were folks who were saying, hey, look out for this guy because, he's got a hair trigger and he's being extra aggressive with folks for no doggone reason. Now, he said he thought Jonathan was intoxicated. So I think that's his go-to thing because there was a 65-year-old black man, a resident of Wolf City, who everybody knows. His name is James Alton Brown. And he was out walking one day and he has a slight limp. And Officer Lucas decided to start following behind him in his police car. And he followed behind him, it says, for about a quarter mile. A quarter mile. This man is walking with a damn limp. So he wasn't moving fast. You can imagine how long it took for him to cover a quarter mile. But this officer is just following him, watching him, probably trying to craft a story, a narrative, a reason to stop him. And he said he thought he was drunk because he had a bit of a limp at 65, starting to see a pattern with this Sean Lucas. So he stopped 65-year-old James, and James says, what the hell? What's wrong with you? I'm not drunk. I'm trying to get wherever it is I'm trying to get. Why are you messing with me? And then, he put hands on him, and he did that thing that police officers do when they put hands on you. You must go to jail. So he arrested him for resisting arrest as well as public intoxication. This is Sean Lucas. Now, I don't know whether or not Mr. Brown filed a personnel complaint when this thing happened. This is another reason why I'm often encouraging you, when you do have an encounter and it's BS, to create a paper trail. You have to create a paper trail so that when something happens that gets national attention, and this is national now because he's killed Jonathan Price, the department can't say, well, we've never had any complaints. We don't know anything about this guy involved in police misconduct, because those of you who have been involved with this officer have been calling and making complaints. Even if they choose to ignore it, you still need to create a paper trail. Don't make a phone call, create a paper trail. And when you write a letter, you don't write it to one person, you write it to everybody up and down that officer's chain of command. You start at the top with the police chief. If they have a civilian review board, and this is a 6-member department, so there's probably one person who's handling everything. He's probably the chief, the mayor, and the damn sheriff. I don't know. But still, create a paper trail is very important, and keep a copy of whatever documentation you send for yourself. But we know that this Sean Lucas was out of control. And so he arrested poor Mr. Brown, 65 years old. The charges for the drunk in public, of course, were dismissed because it was bogus. But Mr. Brown, who's probably on a fixed income, is now still fighting the resisting arrest charge. So that means he's either got to get a public defender who may or may not try to get him to just plead to anything, because you're 65 years old and you're not going to get in any more trouble. You just want this to be gone and over with. But now he's in the system, right? Or he's going to have to spend money to go get an attorney to actually fight it. Money he probably does not have, and something that did not even need to happen. And so why the police chief over there on Wolf City did not check Sean Lucas early on is beyond me. He sits in jail now on $1 million bail for the fatal shooting of Jonathan Price. So I think it's important to note that the attorney who is representing Sean Lucas in this particular case is the same attorney who represented Amber Geiger in the fatal shooting of Botham Jean. So I don't know if he's doing this pro bono, or if, because this is another high profile case. You have attorneys who chase high profile cases to defend, just like you have civil rights attorneys who chase high profile cases to go to money court. So the attorney who represented Amber Geiger. His name is Robert Rogers, and he is representing Sean Lucas. So that's that. My good buddy Daniel Cameron is still trying to prevent grand jurors over in Kentucky from speaking out about the information that he did or did not give to them during their review of the Breonna Taylor incident. You know, he tried to, Daniel Cameron, give the inference that somehow he had nothing to do with what the grand jury had to say. He just presented the evidence and they came up with a non-indictment, right, of the other two. Well, they didn't even consider the other two because he said their involvement was justified. They were returning fire after they had been fired upon first by Kenneth Walker, the boyfriend. And so don't even worry about that. But let's talk about Officer Brett Hankinson, another one who was not tenured, an easy fix, an easy sacrificial lamb. Let's talk about him firing rounds into the good white neighbor's house. And that's the only thing that he wanted the grand jurors to focus on. And so now they're out and they're hearing and they're like, hey, hold up. Let me tell you what really went on. And Daniel Cameron is doing his level best. He's been firing off briefs and motions to prevent them from talking under the guise of he wants to protect the sanctity of the grand jury system and the secrecy that surrounds it, because if he doesn't fight to protect that, then it can be irreparably harmed. That's his story. That's his version. That's his stalling tactic for right now. So we'll see what happens. I will let you know if there's anything more to report on whether or not Daniel Cameron is successful in keeping this information from being discussed. One of the things that did come out is that we know that one of the officers who was involved in the affidavit, the search warrant that was given to the judge, actually lied on the affidavit. Now the officer says, well, you know, I maybe could have worded it different. I didn't really lie. Maybe I could have worded it a little bit better for the judge. And the judge is not happy about it because now the judge says that had she known then what she knows now, she would not have given that no-knock warrant in the first place. So there's a lot of shenanigans that's going on within that department, circling of the wagons, trying to figure out a way to minimize and mitigate bad behavior and throw the public off with company speak, double talk on the part of everybody involved. Real briefly, over in Dallas, police chief, female black, Renee Hall, submitted her resignation letter. And shortly after that, I now know that Carmen Best, the female black police chief over in Seattle, has also been run out on a rail. She wasn't getting the support that she needed, and she didn't have a support system that she was able to bring in with her to make sure that she did well. And so she's like, I'm out of here. I don't need this. She spent 28 years on that police department. And so she too is gone by the wayside. Over in Vallejo Police Department, you've heard me talk about the fatal 14. Those are 14 police officers who've been involved in multiple deadly uses of force or just uses of force. Well, one of them has just now been fired, Ryan McMahon. He has a twin brother who's still on the Vallejo Police Department, who is also one of the fatal 14. Ryan McMahon was the officer involved in the fatal shooting of Ronell Foster back in 2017, a year before Willie McCoy was shot and killed by Vallejo Police Department, Officer Ryan McMahon. Ryan McMahon was one of 6 officers in the Willie McCoy shooting. He was the only officer involved in the fatal shooting of Ronell Foster. And what happened with Ronell Foster, if you don't know, he was riding his bike one night and I think he didn't have a light on it. And so Ryan McMahon saw him and he says that I'm going to have to teach this young man a lesson. Now, I don't know if he said young man, but he said, I'm going to teach him a lesson. And so he went in pursuit of Ronell and he chased him back behind a building after several blocks. And of course, he had a camera, but he didn't turn it on until after the education about riding without a light on your bike was over. And when he turned his camera on, Ronell was dead. The one version that we were given was the one Ryan McMahon put forth, which is that Ronell Foster was reaching for his flashlight, his gun, his leg. He was in fear, so he shot and killed him. And so clearly there was a problem with that version because the family received $5.7 million. And now, in addition to the family having a settlement from the city, Ryan McMahon has been fired. Still waiting to hear about what the outcome is going to be in terms of the Willie McCoy shooting that occurred exactly a year ago after Ronell Foster. Wouldn't it have been nice if the Vallejo Police Department had dealt with Ryan McMahon in 2017? Willie McCoy might very well still be here. Maybe. I don't know. There were 5 other officers there that were involved in that 56 rounds that they pumped into Willie McCoy's car. So maybe not so much, but nonetheless, Ryan McMahon, he was involved in a variety of things that made social media videos where he's walking up on people on the porch and telling them to come here because he wanted to talk to them. And when they don't, he yanks them off and beats the shit out of them. That is Ryan McMahon. So he's gone. He may, rear his head on another police department somewhere near you. Be careful. Over in Clayton County, Georgia, Sheriff's Department fired the police officer, and I don't know his name, who was involved in the beating of Roderick Walker. Roderick Walker was the young man who was in the Uber, or I think it was a Lyft. He was a passenger. Officer pulled him over, wanted to talk to the driver. Driver didn't have ID, and then he decided, black man in the back seat. What's wrong with him? And so Roderick is like, I'm a passenger. Why are you messing with me? And that was just one question too many, I guess. So the officer beat him out and showed him why he was messing with him rather than telling him. And looks like from the booking photos, because you have to get booked when you get beat, Roderick sustained some pretty significant injuries. Well, the officer was fired, and according to the Clayton County Sheriff's Office, they said that the deputy was terminated for excessive use of force once they saw the video of him pinning and punching Roderick Walker. So that's that portion. The other thing that I wanted to share with you is I just had an opportunity over the last few days to see the documentary on the Laquan McDonald shooting, and it's called 16 Shots. If you do a little search on your TV menu, you might find where it's showing again. And if you haven't seen it, it was really interesting. And this documentary, again, speaks to police officers, police commissioners, mayors, Rahm Emanuel, who go to great lengths to keep stuff out of the public venue, right? This happened in 2014, November 2014, when Jason Van Dyke was the officer who shot and killed 17-year-old Laquan McDonald. And what ultimately happened is that they lied. The officers who were there on scene lied. They said that Laquan McDonald, even the police chief at the time, and of course the head of the FOP, all were speaking about this incident. And what they said was that Laquan had this knife in his hand and that he was being aggressive. And I think they wanted to say he was under the influence of drugs. All of that could be true, but he wasn't being aggressive. He did have a knife. But when you see the video, you understand why why Jason Van Dyke was ultimately found guilty on all counts. He was found guilty for second-degree murder, as well as 16 counts of aggravated battery, and that was for every round that he fired at Laquan that hit him. 16 shots. Now, what was ultimately said by the department is that, and I'm talking Chicago again, what was ultimately said in 2014 is that Laquan was walking down the street and then he lunged at the officers with this knife. And of course, Jason Van Dyke was in fear for his life, so he had to return fire. This guy's got a knife. You can kill somebody with a knife. What you see on the video, if you watch the documentary, 16 Shots, is that you see Laquan walking down the street. You see a black and white vehicle come up behind him, pass him, pull in front of him a few feet. And so he's walking in the direction that the car is, but he's not walking to the car. He's walking down the center of the street, the police vehicle is kind of off to the left of Laquan. He's not turning in their direction or really paying them much attention other than he's walking in the direction that the car has now stopped. And then you see Jason Van Dyke get out of the car, and I think they said within 6 to 8 seconds he fires 16 shots in 15 seconds. So in other words, he emptied his clip. He shot every bullet that was in his gun, a bullet a second. And then they said that, Laquan had charged them and blah, blah, blah. And now we know that every officer that was there that was lied about what actually happened. And we know that the mayor had a chance to see the video. We know that the district attorney at the time, I believe her name was Anita Alvarez. Yeah, Anita Alvarez. She had a chance to see the video. And all of them pretended like Laquan was the bad guy here and that Jason Van Dyke was legitimately in fear for his life. And then, of course, once they realized that this video was about to come out, they were like, ooh, we have stalled as long as we can, but this thing is about to hit ahead because folks, attorneys were requesting through FOIA and other places the video. They wanted to see the video. And once they realized that it's about to bust, Rahm Emanuel decided, you know what, I'm not even running for mayor no more. I'm out of here. And then we know that Kim Foxx wound up replacing Anita Alvarez as the state attorney general because of her shenanigans involved in that. And what also happened during that time is that the family was given a settlement, a civil settlement. I think the family was given $5 million. The family was given $5 million because they're like, this is bad. Much like the Breonna Taylor case, anytime there's a civil settlement, the reason that cities settle is because they know if they take this thing to court, it's going to be all bad. And so let's just cut our losses and let's offer some money that the family will accept. We can get them to go away. We can buy their silence because with that civil settlement comes, so you're not going to talk about this no more. This is over. You're going to take your money and you'll be glad. Versus if they went to court, a jury could look at the facts of the case and say, oh my God, rather than $5 million to the family of Laquan McDonald, we're going to give you $75 million. And so they cut their losses by offering some money to make the family go away. And they did this in the case of Laquan McDonald, and they did it within about 6 months. They did it fairly quickly when they realized this is bad. We're not going to be able to keep the information to ourselves, and let's settle and get this family out of our hair. I kind of feel like the same thing the family did with Breonna Taylor, because now that family has accepted $12 million, how do you demand criminal charges against the officer who is facing liability? And it's just Brett, right? And we know he's not facing liability for Breonna. He's facing liability because of the neighbor. How do you get a do-over in terms of Sergeant Mattingly and Detective Cosgrove, the officers who were at the front door, the officers who shot Breonna? Now, they say they don't know which one's bullet killed her. They could figure it out if they wanted to. But nonetheless, the family's got $12 million, and I believe that they have no leverage to compel the department to do anything different. Cameron is the attorney general over there. He could appoint a second special prosecutor to look at Cosgrove and Mattingly. I don't think he will, because that means he's going to be inferring that he did something wrong, and somehow this new prosecutor is going to second guess him. So I don't see him appointing anyone over him to look at those two. So I think it's a done deal. And I'm just thinking, what was the rush? What if you waited a few months or a few weeks or a few days before you accept that money to get that criminal conviction that you so rightly deserve for the death of your loved one? But this is what municipalities do. This is what police departments do. This is what administrators, this is what politicians, this is what mayors do to prevent you from knowing what's really going on. And so if you haven't had an opportunity to see 16 Shots, the documentary, it goes into great detail about how persistent the activists were on the ground there and how successful their persistence wound up paying off, if you will, in that they were able to get a criminal conviction. But then, at the last minute, they got a damn slap in the face. Okay, so we're going to convict Jason Van Dyke, all 16 counts for every bullet, and convict him of second-degree murder. But then the judge decides, okay, so when it gets time for the penalty sentencing, the judge didn't even include the 16 counts of aggravated assault, aggravated battery for each bullet. The judge ultimately sentenced Jason Van Dyke on the second-degree murder only. And because that was the only thing that the judge considered when he was the one who gave the sentence, he gave him 6 years. 6 years state. So that means Jason Van Dyke conceivably could be out of jail in 3 years. That was 2017, family. He could be getting out any minute. He could be getting out any minute. He could be out for all we know. This happened in November of 2014, the shooting. He went to jail in sometime in 2017. He could be out and we don't even know. I'm just saying. So there's a lot. There's a lot going on. It's a lot to keep up with. And, on the heels of Jonathan Price being shot just a week ago, I'm not encouraged that there's an appetite for these police departments, any of them, to do anything different. And so it's incumbent upon all of you who are watching to not get lulled into a false sense of security, to not get distracted, to remain singularly focused on justice, on accountability when you talk about police reform, and to make sure that when you have an opportunity to ask a question, you ask the right ones. If you have an opportunity to write a letter on behalf of one of these family members who are still dealing, waiting, asking for justice in the name of their loved one, that you do something to help if you can. Sometimes it's just a letter, an email that costs you nothing but a little bit of time. And, but for the grace of God, there go I or you. And so certainly you would want that kind of support if you found yourself similarly situated. So I just wanted to share that with you with regards to, just how crafty these police chiefs are, and to what lengths they will go to keep information from you, to what lengths they will go to craft a narrative that has nothing to do with the evidence, with body cam footage, with statements of witnesses, to exclude witnesses and present only those that support their narrative, to the lengths that they will go to dirty up a victim, to accuse them of all sorts of things that they can't speak to because they're not here, to refute their version of the events that led up to the deadly use of force because, again, they're not here. And so for those of you who are listening, should you find yourself similarly situated in an encounter with a police officer, what I say is comply, survive the encounter. The goal is to go home. And if you need to create a paper trail, if you need to get a good attorney, then you do all that after the fact. But these folks have no problem killing us. They have no problem giving your family money after the fact. It's not their money. And they will continue to do that unless and until you start putting people in places of position and authority who value the same kinds of things you value, who have an appetite for real police reform, for real transparency, for real accountability. And so we're days away from an election. Certainly there are some important down ballot folks to look at here in Los Angeles. We have DA Jackie Lacey, who's running against George Gascon for district attorney. George Gascon is a former LAPD command staff officer. And of course, the police department is not supporting him because he wants to bring about some modicum of reform. Jackie Lacey reportedly has received over $3.2 million from police unions across the entire state of California. At least $1.2 million was put into her campaign by our LAPD police union, the Los Angeles Police Protective League. And so you understand why police unions want Jackie Lacey. She hasn't prosecuted a police officer in the history of ever. Well, let me take that back, because she is prosecuting a police officer from the Hollenbeck police station who beat up um, Richard Castillo, a homeless man over in East LA, because her political career is on the line. But prior to that, she hadn't prosecuted a police officer for anything, even when our police chief back in the day, Charlie Beck, had offered up a police officer, a black man, but a police officer nonetheless, for prosecution. And even when Charlie Beck said, "Hey, Jackie, I want you to prosecute this one," she was like, "Nah, I'm good. I'm good." So now she's fighting for her political career. She's offered up the officer from Hollenbeck Division who beat Richard Castillo. And she's also stepping aside right now in the fatal police shooting of a Hispanic guy by the name of Daniel Hernandez, who was shot by LAPD officer Tony McBride. The reason Jackie Lacey's office is stepping aside and letting the California State Attorney General investigate that deadly use of force is because Tony McBride is the spawn of LAPD Police Protective League Director Jamie McBride, the same Los Angeles Police Protective League who put $1.2 million into Jackie Lacey's campaign. So there's that. Sounds like a conflict of interest to me. And that's one of the things that, when you guys are talking to folks about police reform, you ought to see what you can do to stop police unions from contributing massive amounts of money to prosecutors. You understand why prosecutors don't want to prosecute police officers, or if they do it half-heartedly, because police unions have given them millions and millions of dollars in support of their election or re-election. So if you know this, then you'll know what to ask. So having said that, I'm going to step away. That was a lot. And, you didn't see me last week because every now and again, Kinfolk, I have to just have like a mental health cleansing, right? I got to step away. I got to take a deep breath. I have to, be good to me. So sadly, police are the gift that keep on giving. When I see you next week, if I come back next week, I'll probably have more to say, or at least update you. Maybe there won't be anything more to say. Maybe I'll just update you on some things that are continuing to go on behind the scenes that no one is paying attention to, because little tink is soaking up all the oxygen out of the air. But I wanted to update you. Take a look at the documentary 16 Shots. It's really good. It's really informative. And when you're watching 16 Shots, just know that what you're seeing go on by those politicians, the mayor, the police chief, is not unique to Chicago. This is how they get down. This is what happens across many of the 18,000 different police departments that exist in the U.S. of good old A. So that's that, family. For those of you who may have an interest in my t-shirt collection, you can go to my website, Sgt Dorsey Speaks. No, you can go to my website, Sgt Cheryl Dorsey is the website where you can go and you can order. Not only do I have t-shirts, but I also have hoodies, and I have them in different colors. So you can do that there. And for those of you who are waiting on your order, I promise you, I'm going to see the t-shirt fairy tonight. That's one of the reasons why I need to get off this phone, is because I'm headed to see the t-shirt fairy, and I will be picking up my inventory. So I'll share here in the link with you the place where you can go and order it. And you don't have to worry about Venmo, CashApp, PayPal, all that stuff anymore. You can send me your size, your mailing address, your color choice, all through the website, sgtcheryldorsey.com. And when you go there, just click on the tab for shirts, or as soon as I can pull this up, I will give it to you here. You can click on this link that I'm going to give you. And I appreciate your support. And also, while you're there, you can check out my autobiography, For those of you who are not familiar, who are new to my channel, Sgt Dorsey, I'm multitasking, hang on. For those of you who are new to my channel, my autobiography, Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate, you can read the first chapter on my website. So do that. It talks about my 20-year LAPD career, as well as shenanigans that I was involved in, witness to, and a lot of what I do here with you, which is, talk to you about ways in which you might survive police encounters. I do all that in my autobiography. So check it out. And before I go, I'll just quickly, before I go, I will just quickly take a look at a couple of comments and see if I can respond to you. Just give me a second here. Okay, so here's the link for the shirts and hoodies. For anybody who has an interest, there's that. And let me see. Thank you to Bonnie, Jamie, Mose, Black Lion. Thank you so much for stopping by. Thank you to my barbershop family for coming through and spending yet another night with me. I may have an opportunity to see some of you tonight in the barbershop. For anybody who doesn't know, I do the barbershop conversations every Wednesday night with my BFF Fred. Tonight at 9 o'clock, if you have an opportunity and you're not doing anything, come on back to the barbershop, 9 p.m. Pacific, here on YouTube, Barbershop Conversations. Fred is going to be talking to Holly Mitchell, who is running for a Senate, no, not Senate seat. She's running for the Board of Supervisors in Los Angeles. So if you would like to ask Holly some questions about quality of life issues, you can do just that tonight in Barbershop Conversations here on YouTube. So I'm going to stick my head in. I may have a question or two that I'll slide over to Fred because I wanted to sit in, but her manager wouldn't let me. So they know what I'm capable of. They wouldn't let me sit in. But if I need to come and slide a little piece of paper over to Fred and tell him to ask her this, ask her that, because should she become successful in being elected to the Board of Supervisors, for those of you who don't know, the Board of Supervisors, one of their responsibilities is the LA County Sheriff's Department. And you already know LA County Sheriff's Department is off the chain. And so what I want to know is, Holly, what are you going to do about Sheriff Alex Villanueva and those 17 different internal gangs that he has there on his department? You know, the Vikings, the executioners, the regulators, the 3,000 boys, the 2,000 boys. I want to know, is anybody going to rein them in, or are they just going to continue to roam free and do that thing that they do so well? I want to know if Sheriff Alex Villanueva, has anybody seen his leg? Because that's where they say they get these tattoos. I want to have somebody pull his pants leg up and just take a look and see what kind of tats he has. Because we know that the undersheriff, Paul Tanaka, was reportedly a Viking out of the Linwood station when he was over there. So I just want to know what Holly is going to do, if she can, as a brand new member to the Board of Supervisors, should she be successful in her election. Be nice to know if she's going to take a stand. If you get a chance, ask her. I'll see you guys in the barbershop tonight at 9. See the rest of you kinfolk next week. Tell their family, be good, be safe.